Be sure to like and subscribe to Starbound here on YouTube. Supporting us may seem small, but it means everything to the journey we're on. Every like, every subscription is a step forward for us to share these stories with more people. I stealthily slipped into the cantina, my fingers brushing against the collar around my neck to ensure that the slave collar was well hidden beneath the mechanic's overalls I had snatched from a nearby repair bay. I'd managed to avoid detection so far, but the pressure was rising. If I could only stay under the radar for 3 more standard time units, Ext and his crew would have no choice but to move on, making their deliveries. And maybe, just maybe, that would give me the chance I so desperately needed for freedom. The cantina was alive with activity, a chaotic blend of alien life forms that filled the air with sounds, clicks, chittering, and the occasional sharp trill or warble, accompanied by the dull hum of universal translators whispering into the ears of every being present. The air smelled faintly of grease, alcohol, and something earthy, like spices from distant worlds. It was impossible to tell what you were listening to, but an exquisite texture severed your imagination. 5 lines of copious letters, monks. The chatter from the various patrons echoed across the room, the different languages mixing into a harmonious cacophony that felt strangely comforting to my ears. It was a hub of life, of business, and of stories, yet I couldn't help but feel like a phantom in this sea of beings, trying to avoid the one person who could destroy me completely. At the far end of the room, in the shadowed corner, I noticed a table with only one occupant. A solitary figure, and not just any figure. This one caught my attention immediately. It was a biped, probably of primate origin, much like myself. Though I was covered in the dark sable fur typical of my species, this being had almost no hair. Its skin was smooth and pink, almost translucent at the extremities where the garment didn't cover it. It was hard to see what the face was like, smooth and rounded the way a mouse and birds were. A small patch of hair sat atop its head, and there was an elaborate tuft of curly hair under what appeared to be some kind of breathing apparatus. The more I looked, the more it seemed to be some sort of filter, perhaps for inhaling or processing gases from the atmosphere. I wasn't familiar with the species, but I knew that the beings around me weren't always the most typical in appearance. I glanced at the table next to it, where another dozen or so of these beings were chatting animatedly amongst themselves. But this one sat alone, a vast spread of compressed plant fiber spread in front of it, covered in squiggly lines and rudimentary pictures. What looked like a form of writing. It seemed absorbed in its reading, yet it hadn't noticed me. This might be my chance. If I could talk to this being, perhaps I could remain hidden from X and his crew. They would surely be looking for a lone, frightened slave trying to escape. But if I were in conversation with someone else, it might just buy me the time I needed. I scampered over, adjusting the oversized overalls as I made my way to the table, making sure my fur was smoothed down to avoid drawing attention. As I approached, I gestured toward one of the empty chairs and said, "Do you mind?" This being looked up at me, its face contorting into what I believed to be a friendly expression. Its gaze was thoughtful, yet it didn't seem alarmed by my presence. Its voice rumbled low and deep when it spoke, reminding me of the Volta, an ancient 6-legged creature from my homeworld used as a beast of burden. The words were strange, but my translator unit worked quickly. Negative. Self-assistance. Young male. Diminutive. I blinked, momentarily thrown off. Actually, I'm female, I replied, trying to maintain composure. Tasia is the name. Beeth is my species. Exclamation. Apology. The being seemed genuinely surprised. Name is Commander Richard Forrest, HMS Endeavor, human of species. Sincere greetings. Offense not meant. I nodded, feeling a slight weight lift off my shoulders. None taken, I said, settling into the chair. I must admit, I haven't heard of humans before. We're new, the commander replied. Admitted to the Galactic Federation after FTL discovery. A lot of new species for us to learn about. Much work still to be done. He extended an appendage toward me, in what I assumed was a gesture of greeting. Interesting to meet, Bith. I'm sure it's all very overwhelming, I said, glancing around the bustling cantina again. So, what are you reading? This? He looked down at the compressed fiber. It's traditional news from my home planet, a paper form of information, before digital media became the norm. My planetary group is losing a sporting competition called cricket. He paused, glancing up at me with a playful gleam in his eye. I'm curious, can you deliver a googly? Citizenship offered for a decent wrist spinner. I beg your pardon. This is for a googly. Citizenship offered for a decent wrist spinner. I raised an eyebrow. I'm afraid I have no idea what a wrist spinner is, Commander, I replied. But if you need one, I'm willing to give it a try. Before he could respond, a shadow loomed over the table. My heart sank into my stomach as I turned, expecting to see X, but instead, it was another human, this one offering the commander a beverage with a polite nod. "Cup of tea, sir," the new human said, his voice steady and composed. "Exclamation, gratitude," the commander responded. "Chief, make sure the crew stays in line." The commander reached for a metal canister at his side, opened it, and inhaled deeply from the nozzle. I watched, curious, as he exhaled with a contented sigh. "Apologies," he said, noticing my stare. "Pure oxygen, galactic standard air, is a bit lacking for humans. We require supplementation on occasion." "Aye, aye, sir," came the reply. "Fascinating," I said, intrigued. "My species has similar requirements. Galactic standard gravity is about 10% too low for us, too." The commander nodded, a satisfied look crossing his face. "Agreement. Gravity much too low. Much annoyance." He then offered me the oxygen canister, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it and brought the nozzle close to my face. I inhaled deeply, feeling the pure oxygen fill my lungs. It felt like a revitalizing jolt, clearing the fog from my mind. As I exhaled, I closed my eyes for a moment, savoring the feeling. But when I opened them, my breath caught in my throat. Standing behind the commander, towering over us like an ominous shadow, was Eth. The black, caitous form of the alien exuded malevolence. His mandibles clicked in a rhythmic pattern that sent shivers down my spine. He had found me. "Ha! There you are, you treacherous slave!" X's voice was cold and filled with venom. "You'll scream all the way to Epsilon 6, I promise you that. You'll regret ever thinking you could escape." I felt his pincer grip my arm, lifting me effortlessly from my seat. The sheer strength in his hand made my blood run cold, and I could feel the slave collar digging into my neck as I struggled against it. His other pincer raised a control device, and I could see the electric charge building up in it. But then something happened that I couldn't have predicted. The commander, without missing a beat, reached out with one of his appendages and gripped X's manipulator with surprising strength. There was an audible crack as X's exoskeleton fractured under the pressure. The commander's voice, calm and unwavering, filled the space between us. "Apologies," he said coolly, "but this Beath is not a slave. She's a free being. Human air has made her free." X's eyes narrowed, his mandibles clicking angrily. "You have no right to free her. She's mine, bound by galactic law." Commander's translator adjusted its settings, and his voice came through with sharp clarity. "On Earth, we abolished slavery 1,000 years ago. Our laws state that the air of England is too pure for a slave to breathe. She has breathed my air, and now she is free." He gestured toward the oxygen canister in my hand. "She is under my protection." X's rage was palpable as he raised his pincers to strike the commander. But before he could even move, the commander struck with devastating force. One swift punch, and X's carapace shattered, sending him crashing to the floor. His crew, once a menacing force, was swiftly dispatched in a blur of violence. "Ha ha!" The commander turned to me, extending a hand to help me up. "How about you join us, my dear? We could use a good spinner for our cricket team." I took his hand, still in shock from the events unfolding around me, and nodded. "I'd like that." Stepping inside, Commander Richard Forrest quickly swept the room with a practiced gaze. His military background had honed his observational skills to a fine edge. The cantina was filled with all sorts of life forms, species of all shapes, sizes, and temperaments. Despite the chaos of chatter, the clinking of glass, and the swirling of brightly colored beverages, Richard's eyes were laser-focused. He spotted 2 tables that met his needs, both isolated, far enough from prying eyes but still with enough activity around to avoid suspicion. He had no interest in making his business too obvious. Walking up to the first table, he gave the group seated there a once-over. They were a strange mix. Some humanoid, others insectoid. He could see that a few of them were already eyeing him, curious but not hostile. Without a second thought, he tossed a credit chip onto the table in front of them, a subtle but effective way to smooth things over. "Awfully sorry, chaps. I need the table," Richard said with an air of casual charm. "Meeting an old chum, you know how it is. 50 bearer credits for your trouble." One of the aliens, an amphibious-looking creature with translucent skin, snatched the chip with a quick motion, almost too fast for the human eye to track. "Negotiable," it muttered, with an accent that was a blend of clicks and purrs, its eyes gleaming as it studied the chip. "Bearer credits. Valuable beyond their face value, you know." Richard smiled, the transaction going smoothly as he watched the group rise and shuffle off. He had achieved the first step of his plan, which had required a bit of improvisation. With the table now empty, he casually kicked one of the stools into a welcoming position and seated himself. His body language was relaxed but strategic, with his posture angled so that he remained visible to anyone who might enter the room. He was hoping that his target, the elusive Bagrath, would slip in soon. He was on the clock, and he couldn't afford to waste any more time. His patience was rewarded when the assault team arrived at the second table, led by Chief Jenkins, ever the diplomat when it came to securing a prime seat. Jenkins had always preferred the direct approach. With a firm hand, he slammed one of his massive palms onto the tabletop, pinning the largest occupant in place with a forceful, piercing glare. Then, without missing a beat, Jenkins scanned the rest of the group and hissed, "You lot, do one now," before jerking his thumb toward the door. They fled with the speed of herbivores escaping from a predator. Jenkins had a way of asserting dominance, and it worked every time. Once the table was cleared, the team settled in, ordering drinks through the interface embedded in the table. Richard, unfazed, opened up his newspaper, as was his habit. The latest edition had a write-up about the loss of the cricket championship back on Earth, an ongoing source of frustration for those who followed the sport. He studied the articles as he glanced around the room. His eyes flicked toward the door, hoping to catch sight of the Bagrath. His hunch told him it wouldn't be long. It was a tense few minutes before he saw movement at the edge of his vision. There, slipping inside and sticking to the shadows, was the Bagrath. A creature clad in a set of greasy, ill-fitting coveralls. It took a careful, sweeping look around the cantina, checking every corner. Richard held his breath, his fingers flexing slightly. This might just go his way. And then, success. The Bagrath darted towards him, arriving at his table almost in a blink, its sharp, angular form, almost too swift to fully follow. It pointed at one of the empty stools, its voice purring out in a low, rumbling tone that contrasted with the flat tones of the translator. "Objection?" Richard glanced up at the creature, putting on a friendly smile. "Of course not. Help yourself, young fellow." The Bagrath, settling into the stool, positioned itself with calculated precision. Its body was angled in a way that kept it between Richard and the door, a tactical move that Richard couldn't help but admire. Good instincts, he thought to himself, already more impressed with the creature than he had expected. "Correction," the Bagrath muttered, its voice almost a whisper. "Female gender. Name is Tashia. Species is Beeth, huh?" Richard raised an eyebrow, startled. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry," he quickly apologized. "My name is Commander Richard Forrest of HMS Endeavour. Humanity is my species. Pleasure to meet you. I meant no offense. Not taken, the creature replied smoothly, its demeanor calm. Confession, human, not known. We are new here, not long since joined the Galactic Federation after we discovered faster-than-light travel. We don't know many species yet, a lot to learn. Richard nodded, noting the slight hesitation in the creature's voice. Tasia, he reminded himself, was still learning the ropes, much like he was. The universe had recently expanded in ways that most sentient beings hadn't anticipated, and with that expansion came a slew of new species, all struggling to make sense of the unknown. Just then, Chief Jenkins caught Richard's eye from across the table. He rubbed his ear, a subtle gesture, and gave a quick flick of his finger. Danger was on the way. The Zelens had likely noticed the absence of their Bagreth slave. Richard's attention snapped back to his paper, trying to appear nonchalant as he continued reading about Earth's cricket woes. Interesting reading, he muttered to Tasia, maintaining his cover. My newspaper, old school news from back home. The old homeland is losing the cricket again. I say, I don't suppose you can bowl a googly, can you? We'll give you a passport if you're a quality wrist spinner. Tasia's brow furrowed in confusion. Wrist spinner? Not known. Richard grinned. It's a technique from a sport called cricket. If you can spin a ball with your wrist, you're a bowler. A good wrist spinner is hard to find. You'll do. Fancy a go? Before she could answer, Chief Jenkins approached the table, a steaming cup in his hands. Richard saw a flash of fear cross Tasia's face as he reached out, but it passed quickly. She looked up and, despite herself, spoke calmly. Cup of tea, sir? Jenkins set the cup down with a flourish, taking care to spin it around so that the handle was positioned correctly before him, just as if they were back on Earth, sipping tea at a diplomatic meeting. Richard barely registered the movement. His focus was entirely on the sense of impending danger. He could see the Zelan forces were closing in fast. Ah, good show, old bean. Stay with the team, please, Chief. Keep them on their toes. Jenkins grunted, clearly not in the mood for small talk, but acknowledged the order. Richard took the pre-prepared oxygen tube from his belt, fixing the mouthpiece to his face. The air in the cantina was thin, far too thin for a human. He took a deep breath, feeling the revitalizing rush of pure oxygen flood his lungs. Oh, sorry, he said, noticing Tasia's curious stare. Just some pure oxygen. Galactic standard air is a tad low for humans. We need a top-up now and then. Tasha's eyes lit up with understanding. Navy intel had reported that BTH species had similar oxygen needs to humans. Galactic standard gravity was only about 10% too low for them as well. Oh, I quite agree, Richard continued, unable to hide his amusement. The gravity is far too low. Very annoying. Fancy a try? He extended the oxygen bottle toward her, hoping to hit the right note. Tasha hesitated, but then accepted it, sniffing at the nozzle with a thoughtful look. As she did so, Richard caught a flicker of movement in his peripheral vision. The Zelens were here, but just a few seconds too late. Richard's hand tightened instinctively. His plan was working. The mission was underway. Tasia handed the bottle back to him, her eyes now fully engaged. Before he could even register the full scope of the situation, the Zelens made their move. One of them grabbed her with a pincered hand, yanking her off her stool. You present falsehood, it growled in a cold, mechanical tone. Education on locomotion. You will go to Epsilon 6. Richard had heard enough. He surged into action, his protective instincts kicking in as the Zelen raised a device in its other claw. With a single, fluid motion, Richard reached out and grabbed the device, squeezing it until it cracked. The alien froze in shock, its mandibles clicking angrily. Sorry, old bean, Richard said with a smile, but I can't let you do that. Tasia here is no slave anymore. The Zelen's focus snapped entirely onto Richard, its voice seething with fury. My legal slave under galactic law, and you primate. Richard remained unfazed, his grip on the broken device tightening. "Actually, my dear alien insect chap, I do. You see, we made slavery illegal 1,000 years ago on Earth. It's enshrined in law. The air of England is too pure for a slave to breathe. The moment a slave breathes English air, they're free. And she's breathed my air. She's free." The Zealand snarled, reaching for its weapon, but before it could react, Richard delivered a devastating blow, sending it stumbling back. The rest of the assault team jumped into action, overwhelming the remaining Zealand crew members with practiced precision. As Richard stood over the fallen enemy, he wiped his hands on his pants, retrieving his pocket square to clean up. "Signal Earth," he muttered under his breath. "HMS Endeavour is changing her flag. We are now under the West Africa Squadron. Request they send a gunboat or two. I'm about to start a war under the Lord Mansfield Edict." Turning to Tassia, still crouched on the deck, Richard offered her a hand. "My dear, how about you come with us and try that googly? We still need a good spinner for the cricket team." She took his hand, her expression a mixture of confusion and wonder. She was free, and she knew it now. As they made their way toward "Wonderful, looks like they have their distractions sorted," said Dickie as he extricated them from behind the barrels and walked off towards another walkway further down the concourse. "I think we should grab our ride." Tasia skipped to keep up with him, reaching for his hand once more without really considering why she did so. "Commander, what was that? That is not how attacks happen. Why send drunk people where they could be seen? Why not strike from concealment like a true predator? Or from a position of strength?" Dickie was perplexed. "Do the bag rat not utilize deception in warfare?" he asked. "No, Commander, concealment, yes, and often advantageous terrain, but how would lying help in fighting? No species does such a thing." "Oh, I see. Well, Wonk, this will be a fun little war," Dickie laughed quickly and quietly. "Tasia, my dear, yes, call me Dickie, all my friends do." "And here we are." He extended a hand towards a small vessel. Tasia asked, "Is this your Endeavour?" "Oh, no, just my personal gig. The Endeavour's a little larger than this," Dickie replied. With that, Dickie keyed in a short code and led Tasia aboard. She marveled at the interior. Brightly lit, the air rich, and the gravity high. The highest she'd encountered on any space-going vessel. She bounced on her footpads, luxuriating in the feeling. She followed Dickie as he strode off to the prow of the vessel, not wanting to stray far from the human. They entered an open room with multiple workstations where more humans sat. Dickie draped himself across a centrally positioned chair and indicated a nearby one to Tasia as he barked out a report. One of the other humans turned and rattled off a response. "Sniper and perimeter teams aboard, sir. Chief reports the freighter is ours. All Zero-Lankia slave population is okay. One injury in the team, non-serious. Treatment can wait until we're back at Endeavour." "Very well, I guess we should toddle off home then," Dickie said. "As you please, coxswain," came the reply. Tasia felt more than heard a hum through the vessel as it backed away from the walkway, catching sight of the space station structure whirling quickly on a view screen as they pivoted and thrust away into the darkness. "That's coming up to half impulse thrust," Dickie said. "Sir Chief reports the freighter is maxed out at this burn rate." "Very good. Hold at this and let them keep station. Keep them under our port side and keep scanners at full range." Tasia drifted off into an exhausted sleep as the humans chattered back and forth, unable to believe how her life had changed in the last hour. Some period of time later, she startled awake at the touch of Dickie's hand to her shoulder. "Tasia, wake up, old fruit. There's something you should see." Dickie directed her attention to a nearby screen. "That's my Endeavour," he said proudly. A tubular ship, unlike any other design Tasia had come across, was displayed. She could discern no up or down, no top or bottom, or sides to its construction. She looked closer. It appeared to be an open tube, open through the middle, apart from a complex network of interlocking circles that filled the inner tube like a spirograph gone wild. She looked closer at the display and the extra information the computer was overlaying onto it. "What units are these measurements in?" "Oh, sorry about that." Dickie clicked on a couple of options, and the measurements changed to galactic standards. "That says this ship is around 600 ceilings long." Tasia exclaimed. That's insane! 600 ceilings? Let's see. Multiply by 1.6. Yep, that's about a kilometer. Close enough. Dickie burbled happily, obviously proud of his vessel. How do you build ships that big? The power requirements for gravity generation alone on a vessel that size must be immense. No other species builds that large for anything other than gravity-free cargo transports. Ah, well that's the thing, Dickie said. The gravity doesn't actually need to be generated. It's kind of a byproduct. As a byproduct of what? Our FTL drives. Endeavor has 4 of them. She's really quite sprightly for a frigate. Tasia looked incredulously at him. How in the 7 dodecahedrons of a hell dimension are you achieving FTL? I'm no scientist, but I've been dragged around space my entire enslaved life, and I've had to scrub the stains off engines of every description, but I've never seen one that generates gravity as a byproduct. Well, it's really quite simple. One of the other crew members spoke up from the next screen over. All due respect, Skipper, but no, it isn't true. Simple is the wrong word. Let's see. It's hideously complex, quite ununderstandable in fact, but it works, and the chief engineer understands it. He explained it to me. The chief engineer is insane, Dickie commented. He's temperamental, I'll give you that, but he's very clever, sir. He developed a machine to take off his socks last week. See? Very clever chap. It was a bazooka and 2 bits of string. We aren't allowed back to that planet. We aren't even allowed to enter orbit. Fair point, Smithers. Now, shut up while I explain our FTL drive to this lovely lady. Aye, sir, shutting up, Smithers said immediately. Dickie paused and refocused his attention on Tasia. Now then, FTL and gravity in just a couple of easy, horrendously complicated steps. Ready? Tasia collected herself. She had never seen a crew and their commanding officer interact like these humans. They made life seem, well, fun. Be ready as a Volta in spring, Dickie said. Lovely. Here we go. About a millennium ago, humans built this big circular thingy called a Large Hadron Collider, and they sent molecules around it to bang into each other to see what would happen. Some people thought it might make a black hole and suck our planet through itself. Thankfully, they were wrong. Tasia interrupted. You built this on your own planet when some people thought it might destroy it? Why? Why would you do that? To see what would happen, of course. You humans are crazy, so we keep being told. Now back to the engines. Eventually, we discovered dark matter, and through that, a whole bunch of new molecules we didn't know about before. When we put them in an LHC, thankfully a new one we had built in space, we found a combination that didn't produce a black hole so much as it did a wormhole. A tiny little wormhole. And then we figured out how to anchor one end of the wormhole, even though it was tiny, just a few centimeters long in real space, from entrance to exit. But we found that if we then fired a super heavy molecule of dark matter through that tiny anchored wormhole, it exerted a push on the anchor and accelerated the particle. And then if you put another wormhole behind that and caught the particle in another wormhole, it got even faster, pushed even harder, and so on and so on. And when you have a line of lovely little wormholes in a row, they generate gravity. Tasia breathed. Yes, see? Simple. You're telling me your ship has a tube through the middle of it, with 4 wormholes being constantly generated inside that, and you blindly hurl dark matter through it because it makes you go fast? No, of course not, Dickie replied. But you said Endeavor has 4 engines? Yes, but each engine has 100 wormholes in series, but they really are very, very small. You lunatics, Tasia muttered. That's not how physics even works. That makes absolutely no sense. You should literally rip yourselves apart just by trying to turn that on. How? Why? What? I can't even... Dickie smiled. I know, it's not how physics as we know it works, but that's okay, because that's not important. What is important is two things. One, it does work, and two, it's really, really fast. The disbelief stayed with Tasia throughout the entire docking procedure with the Endeavor. The gig, as Dickie called it, slipped into its own specialized hangar in the surface of the immense vessel. But the Zerlon freighter was brought alongside and connected via an umbilical, through which the 50 other slaves on board were ushered. Tasia found herself acting as a nexus of communication between the humans and the former slaves. She helped arrange accommodations, health checkups for all, and removal of the hated shock collars, all while debating with herself just how to break the news to the other former slaves that their saviors, these humans, were all obviously crazy. Hours later, after finally settling the last of the slaves who were struggling in the high gravity of the human ship, Tasia finally gave herself a hearty shake. Crazy or not, this was her life now, and she'd better deal with it. Inquiring from one of the medical humans where she could find Dickie, she set off in search of his bridge. Did the humans have some sort of physics-defying river running through their ship too? She thought for a second and decided not to ask. But as she finally found Dickie, puzzling over a star map detailing the homeworlds of the slaves they'd decreed free, the lighting changed to a red hue, and a klaxon started wailing so loudly her ears hurt. "Commander, 12 ships emerging from FTL, approximately 500,000 kilometers off our bow, sir," one of the bridge crew yelled. "Oh, I say, how rude," Dickie responded. "Now then, chaps and chapettes, what is the first rule of a red alert?" He saw Tasia in the corner of the room and waved her over. A red alert is when something important happens and all the lights change and the siren goes off, and the first thing we do is turn them off, the bridge crew chorused as one. Just as the lights returned to normal and the deafening wail stopped, Dickie smiled. "Exactly. Good show. A chap can't think with all that flashing and clanging going on. Now, who has come to visit?" A tall female human, with a skin tone entirely different to Dickie's, turned from a large screen and said, "It appears to be Zerlon ships, sir. All displaying energy signals congruent with charging weapons, strangely enough." "Fantastic, how lovely. Thank you, number one. Oh, and allow me to introduce the even lovelier Tessia," Dickie said. Tasia quickly waved her hand at the smiling Lieutenant Singh. "Those are Z-Rian warships, Dickie. We should be running. They have us outnumbered." "Ah, yes. Running, just the ticket," Dickie said cheerfully. "Full ahead flank, number one." Aye, sir." A rumble started to come up through the decking as the HMS Endeavor came to life. Tasia tried not to think about how many wormholes were popping in and out of existence somewhere below her feet and watched the displays alongside Dickie. She noticed something. "Dickie, I meant running away." "Oh no, my dear. We can't do that. If we did, then how would we be able to fight them? Basic tactics, you see. One gets in close, then one gives them a damn good kicking." Tasia whimpered. Her first day of freedom was going to be her last. She was hurtling to her death in a ship full of lunatics, straight into the teeth of a Zerlon battle group. Dickie spoke again. "Number one, range, if you please. Coming up on 300,000, sir." "Thank you. Prepare for a clockwise rotational spin." Aye, sir. The Xylons are opening fire. Range is at 250. Oh, poor show. Far too early. Still, I suppose that counts as the first shot, eh? Fired at us without provocation, no less. Make a note in the log and run out the guns. All guns report ready and ready for rotation, sir. Range is 200,000. "Thank you, number one. I say, Tasia, if you're not too busy this evening, I was wondering if you would do me the honor of dining with me in my quarters." "What are you mad? We're gonna be dead?" Tasia shouted at him. "Well, barring that, of course," Dickie said calmly. "Range 1, 500,000. Xylons firing again," Lieutenant Zing helpfully interjected. "Thank you. Now, about that dinner." Tasia couldn't believe this. This madman. "Fine," she growled. "If we live, I'll dine with you." "Oh, jolly good. Could someone pass the word to my steward? It will be dinner for two in my quarters tonight." Range 1-0-0-0-0-0. Dicky looked back to the screens. The 12 warships had assumed a spread formation, all the better to fire simultaneously at the oncoming endeavor. Range 500, 0, Lieutenant Singh intoned. A look of sudden seriousness settled on Dicky's face. Left, full rudder. Starboard broadside, fire as you bear. A rippling thwong ran through the ship. Initiate spin, dorsal broadside, fire as you bear. Barely a second later, the same thwong made the ship quiver. Or broadside, fire as you bear. Ventral broadside, fire as you bear. Tasia struggled to make sense of the readouts she could see. As far as she could tell, she was standing on a tube of wormholes rolling through space, guns firing from every point of the ship towards certain death. And just one thought was uppermost in her mind: she had nothing to wear for dinner. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more.